Act 1. The 6 Silent Deaths. There are places in this world that are stained by history. Places where the soil itself seems to remember a darkness that time cannot erase. They are not always ancient castles or forgotten battlefields. Sometimes, the most profound evil unfolds in the most ordinary of places, a quiet farm, a family home. In the heart of Bavaria, Germany, lies a patch of land once known as Hinterkaifeck. The name itself is unassuming, meaning nothing more than the farm behind the woods. For generations, it was a place of hard work, of seasons changing, of a family living a simple, isolated life. But in the spring of 1922, this remote homestead became the setting for one of the most brutal, baffling, and coldest unsolved crimes in European history. 6 people, an entire family spanning 3 generations, from the elderly patriarch to a 7-year-old child, and even the new housemaid who had arrived only hours before. All of them slaughtered in a single night of unimaginable violence. The weapon was not a gun, fired from a distance, but something far more intimate, more brutal. A pickaxe, or perhaps a mattock, an everyday farm tool, turned into an instrument of death. But the horror of Hinterkaifeck doesn't end with the murders. The true chill of this story lies in the details that emerged in the days that followed. Footprints in the snow that led to the farm, but never away. Strange noises in the attic days before the crime. A set of house keys that went missing. And the most disturbing fact of all, the killer did not simply flee after the act. Evidence suggests the murderer remained at the farm for several days after killing the entire family. They tended to the livestock, ate the family's food, and slept in their beds, all while the bodies of their victims lay hidden in the barn. To understand the crime, we must first understand the world of Hinterkaifeck. This was not a village. It was a single, isolated property, over a kilometer away from the nearest hamlet of Kaifeck. The farm was owned and run by the Grubers, a family known in the area for being hardworking, financially successful, but also intensely private and, by some accounts, deeply troubled. At the head of the family was the 63-year-old patriarch, Andreas Gruber. Neighbors described him as a stern, domineering, and often cantankerous man. His wife, Cecilia Gruber, was 72. Living with them was their widowed daughter, Victoria Gabriel, aged 35, and her 2 children, 7-year-old Cecilia and 2-year-old Joseph. The 6th and final victim was the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, who tragically began her first day of work on the very day the murders took place. But behind this facade of a simple farming family, dark rumors swirled. The most persistent and disturbing of these was the allegation of an incestuous relationship between Andreas Gruber and his daughter, Victoria. This was more than just gossip. It was an open secret. In fact, both Andreas and Victoria had been convicted and served jail time for incest in 1915. Many in the community believed that Victoria's youngest child, Joseph, was the product of this forbidden union. This deeply disturbing secret created a tense, isolated atmosphere at Hinterkaifeck, cutting the family off from their neighbors and feeding a climate of resentment and mistrust. It was a darkness that existed within the walls of the farmhouse long before the killer ever arrived. Act 2. The Omen. 6 months before the night of the slaughter, in late 1921, the Gruber family's longtime maid, Crescens Rieger, abruptly quit her job. She was a devout and hard-working woman, but she left the farm in a state of terror. She claimed the house was haunted. She told others she constantly heard footsteps and disembodied voices coming from the attic, and felt an unshakable presence watching her. She was convinced that evil resided within the walls of Hinterkaifeck, and she fled for her life. For half a year, the Grubers lived on the farm without a maid, a testament to how isolated and perhaps feared they were in the community. It was during this period that the strange occurrences began to escalate. In the days leading up to March 31st, 1922, Andreas Gruber began noticing things that he couldn't explain. He confided in his neighbors about finding a single set of footprints in the fresh snow. The tracks led from the dense forest at the edge of his property directly to the farmhouse's machine room. But strangely, there were no footprints leading back into the woods. Someone had walked onto his farm, but had seemingly never left. Andreas spent hours searching the property, combing through the barns, the attic, and the sheds, but found no one. A day or two later, another strange event occurred. While in the main house, Andreas found an unfamiliar newspaper from Munich. This was deeply unsettling. He was not a subscriber to any Munich paper, and no one in the area had seen a postman or delivery person near his isolated farm. It was as if a visitor had been there, read the paper, and simply left it behind. Then, a set of house keys vanished. The family searched everywhere, but they were gone without a trace. The feeling of being watched, of an unseen intruder in their midst, was growing stronger. Andreas began hearing noises from the attic himself. The same sounds the former maid had described. One night, he took his pickaxe and thoroughly searched the attic from top to bottom, but again, found nothing and no one. He was a man who trusted no one, but now he was faced with a mystery he could not solve within the confines of his own home. Despite these terrifying omens, Andreas Gruber did not go to the police. Whether due to his stubborn pride, his mistrust of authority, or a fear of his own secrets being exposed, he chose to keep the matter to himself. He told a neighbor about the footsteps and the sounds, but dismissed them as insignificant. On the final day of March, the new maid, Maria Baumgartner, finally arrived, stepping into a house that was already gripped by a silent, creeping dread. She was brought to the farm by her sister, who was likely the last outsider to see any member of the family alive. Hours after her arrival, the silence of Hinterkaifeck would be broken by the sickening thud of a pickaxe, and the farm would seal its dark secrets forever. Act 3. The Night of the Pickaxe. The evening of Friday, March 31st, 1922, was cold and dark. What exactly happened that night at Hinterkaifeck is a chilling puzzle, pieced together from forensic evidence and theories, as there were no survivors to tell the tale. The prevailing theory suggests the crime began with a lure. The killer, likely already hiding on the property, created a commotion in the barn, perhaps a noise with the cattle, to draw the family out, one by one, into a carefully laid trap. It's believed the first to go to the barn was the head of the family, Andreas Gruber. He was likely met with a single, devastating blow to the head from the pickaxe, killing him instantly. When he didn't return, his wife, Kazilia, would have gone to check on him, only to meet the same fate. Then came their daughter, Victoria, followed by her 7-year-old daughter, Kazilia. Each of them was led into the barn like lambs to the slaughter, and each was dispatched with the same ruthless efficiency. The killer's method was brutal and swift, aiming for the head to ensure instant death. With 4 family members now dead in the hay of the barn, the killer was not finished. He or she then moved from the barn into the main farmhouse. Inside, 2 people remained, completely unaware of the carnage just yards away. The first was the new maid, Maria Baumgartner. She was killed in her bedchamber, struck down with the same weapon. The final act of violence was perhaps the most heart-wrenching. The killer entered Victoria's bedroom, where her 2-year-old son, Joseph, was sleeping peacefully in his cot. The toddler was the last to be murdered. The silence of the Bavarian night returned to Hinterkaifeck, but it was now a permanent, deathly silence. For 4 long days, the farm stood quiet. Smoke was seen rising from the chimney, and the dog was still tied up outside. The cattle were fed and milked. From the outside, it seemed as if nothing was wrong. But inside, a horrifying secret lay waiting. The alarm was finally raised on April 4th. Neighbors grew concerned when 7-year-old Kazilia failed to appear for school on Saturday, and then again on Monday. The family had also been conspicuously absent from the Sunday church service, something highly unusual for the devoutly Catholic Kazilia Gruber Sr. A search party was formed, led by a neighbor named Lorenz Schlittenbauer. They arrived at the farm in the late afternoon. They called out, but received no answer. The doors were all locked. After trying to gain entry through a window, they managed to open the barn door. The scene that greeted them was a vision from a nightmare. Lying in the hay, partially covered by an old door, were the bodies of Andreas, his wife Kazilia, his daughter Victoria, and his granddaughter, little Kazilia. They had been stacked on top of each other. The investigators who arrived later would note the sheer brutality of the scene. The victims' heads were crushed and blood was everywhere. After the gruesome discovery in the barn, the search party entered the main house. There, they found the remaining 2 victims. The maid, Maria Baumgartner, was dead in her room, and in his mother's bedroom, little Joseph was found lifeless in his cot. The nightmare was complete. All 6 residents of Hinterkaifeck were dead. Act 4. The Investigation. News of the massacre at Hinterkaifeck sent a shockwave of terror through the quiet Bavarian countryside. The case was so horrific that the Munich Kriminalpolizei, the criminal investigation department, was quickly brought in to take over. Inspector George Rain Gruber and his team arrived at the farm to a scene of almost unimaginable carnage, and a mystery that was already deepening with every passing hour. The initial investigation was hampered by the forensic limitations of the 1920s. There was no DNA analysis, no advanced fingerprinting techniques. The crime scene had also been compromised by the dozens of neighbors and officials who had walked through it before it was secured. The autopsies of the victims were conducted right there in the barn by Dr. Johann Baptist Ommler. He confirmed that all 6 victims had died from massive blunt force trauma to the skull and brain, inflicted by a heavy tool. The murder weapon was soon found in the attic. A mattock, a type of pickaxe belonging to the Gruber family themselves. The autopsies also revealed a heartbreaking detail. 7-year-old Kazilia had not died instantly like the others. She had survived for several hours after the attack, lying in the hay next to the bodies of her mother and grandparents, tearing out clumps of her own hair in terror and agony before she finally succumbed to her injuries. The first logical motive for any such crime would be robbery, but this theory was quickly dismissed. Investigators found a significant amount of money in cash, as well as valuable gold coins and other items, completely untouched within the house. The killer had walked past a small fortune. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was personal. What baffled investigators most was the killer's behavior after the murders. It became chillingly clear that the perpetrator had not fled the scene. For at least 2 or 3 days, someone had remained at Hinterkaifeck. The cattle in the barn had been fed and given water. The family dog, who was tied up outside, had also been cared for. Food had been eaten from the pantry, and meals had been prepared in the kitchen. The beds had been slept in, and the fire in the hearth had been kept alive, with smoke seen rising from the chimney. This wasn't the behavior of a panicked killer. This was the work of someone who felt comfortable, perhaps even at home, amidst the carnage they had created. It suggested a level of cold-blooded audacity that was almost inhuman. The killer had essentially taken over the farm, living there for days while the bodies of his 6 victims lay decomposing just a few feet away in the barn and in the house. The police were not just looking for a murderer. They were looking for a monster who could live alongside his own monstrous deeds. Act 5. The Suspects. The investigation into the Hinterkaifeck massacre would see the police interview over 100 suspects in the years that followed, but a handful of names would surface time and time again, each surrounded by their own cloud of suspicion and local rumor. The primary and most enduring suspect was the neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer. Schlittenbauer had a deeply complicated history with the Gruber family. He had been a lover to Victoria Gabriel, and it was widely believed in the community that he was the true biological father of 2-year-old Joseph, a claim he publicly denied but privately wrestled with. His relationship with the domineering Andreas Gruber was known to be hostile. Schlittenbauer's behavior on the day he discovered the bodies was also highly suspicious. He disturbed the crime scene significantly, moving the bodies and touching potential evidence, actions he later explained as a frantic search for his son. Many felt he remained far too calm and composed for a man who had just stumbled upon such a horrific sight. For years, he was the main focus of the investigation, but police could never find enough concrete evidence to charge him. Decades later, on his deathbed, he allegedly made cryptic statements, further cementing the suspicion that he took the secret of Hinterkaifeck to his grave. Another compelling theory centered around Victoria's husband, Karl Gabriel, the man who was supposedly killed in the trenches of France during World War I. But what if he wasn't dead? Several fellow soldiers later claimed that Gabriel had not died in the battle they thought. The theory suggests that he survived the war, returned home under a different identity, and discovered the horrifying truth of the incest between his wife and her father, and the existence of a child, Joseph, born from it. In a fit of vengeful rage, he could have committed the murders and then vanished forever. This theory provided a powerful motive of jealousy and honor, but without a body or any concrete proof of his survival, Karl Gabriel remains a ghost in the narrative. The investigation also looked into several known criminals in the area. Brothers Adolf and Anton Gump were considered, as they were suspected of involvement in another unsolved murder in the region. There were also drifters and vagrants displaced by the war, who roamed the countryside. The footprints in the snow could have belonged to one of them, a stranger who stumbled upon the isolated farm with robbery or violence in mind. However, the fact that no money was taken made this less likely. Over the years, dozens of confessions were made, but all were proven to be false, made by individuals seeking attention or suffering from mental illness. Every lead the police followed turned into a dead end. The community was rife with accusations and whispers, with neighbor suspecting neighbor. But no arrest was ever made. The secrets of the Gruber family, combined with the lack of evidence, created a perfect storm for an unsolvable crime. The killer of Hinterkaifeck had seemingly committed the perfect murder, and then vanished from the face of the earth. Act 6. A century of silence. In the immediate aftermath of the murders, The 6 headless bodies of the Gruber family and their maid were buried in the nearby Weidhofen cemetery. Their skulls had been sent to Munich for further examination, where, in a strange twist of the era, clairvoyants and mystics were even consulted in a desperate attempt to glean clues. The skulls were never returned. They were lost to the chaos and destruction of World War II, a final, bizarre chapter in an already surreal case. The following year, in 1923, the Hinterkaifeck farm itself was completely demolished. Every building, the house, the barn, the sheds, was torn down and the land was plowed over. The community wanted to erase the physical scar of the tragedy from their landscape. But in doing so, they also destroyed the crime scene forever, ensuring that any evidence that may have been missed would never be found. Today, nothing remains of Hinterkaifeck but an empty field and a small memorial shrine, a lonely marker for a place where 6 lives were so brutally extinguished. The case officially remained open for decades, passed down from one generation of investigators to another, becoming a dark legend in German criminal history. In 2007, students at the Fürstenfeldbruck Police Academy took on the Hinterkaifeck murders as a cold case project, applying modern criminal profiling and investigative techniques to the century-old files. After an exhaustive review, they came to a final conclusion. While their report remains confidential out of respect for any living descendants, the students stated that they had identified a primary suspect and were confident in their theory. But the evidence was no longer sufficient to prove it beyond all doubt in a modern court. The suspect they identified is now long dead. So, after 100 years, the case remains officially unsolved. The identity of the killer who walked out of the forest, lived among his victims, and then vanished back into the darkness is a secret that the Bavarian soil still holds. Was it the jealous neighbor, Lorenz Schlittenbauer? The vengeful husband, Karl Gabriel, returned from the war? Or was it a nameless drifter, a phantom who brought random, inexplicable violence to the isolated farm? The footprints that led to the farm, but never away, serve as the perfect metaphor for the mystery itself. It's a story that arrives with a chilling presence, but offers no escape, leaving us trapped with its unanswered questions. The 6 silent deaths at Hinterkaifeck are a horrifying reminder that sometimes the darkest secrets are not those kept by the living, but those taken to the grave by the dead. What do you think happened at Hinterkaifeck? Share your theories in the comments below. And if you want to explore more dark cases from the past, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Dark Cell Stories.